3 days after I buried my wife, my son stood in my hallway and told me I had 48 hours to leave my own house. He did not shout. He did not look ashamed. Lauren stood beside him with her arms folded, and Daniel said, "The house is mine now, Dad. Mom left it to me. You need to be out by Friday." I put my hand on the wall because the room shifted. Susan's coat was still by the door, her slippers were still by the bed, and my son was speaking to me like I was a tenant. "Say that again," I told him. "The house came to me," he said. "We need to move forward." Move forward. 3 days after his mother's funeral. Tell me honestly, would that have made sense to you? Susan and I had lived in that house in Columbus, Ohio for 37 years. We raised Daniel there. We paid for it. We fixed it. We grew old there. And because we were practical, we had done our wills years earlier with our family attorney, Harold Bennett. The house was simple. It stayed with me for life. After I was gone, then Daniel could inherit what remained. Susan wanted that plain. So did I. That was why Daniel's words did not only hurt, they made no sense. Susan and I were not careless people. We talked through our plans more than once. We met Harold Bennett together. We signed what needed signing together. We made sure the house could never become a weapon used against the surviving one. That mattered to Susan. She had seen too many families turn ugly over property after a funeral. She wanted plain language and clean lines. So did I. That was why, even in grief, my mind kept pushing back. Daniel was not describing a surprise. He was describing an impossibility. "When did your mother change anything?" I asked. "A while ago," he said. "How long?" "It doesn't matter. It was legal." Lauren finally spoke. "Robert, this is already hard enough. Fighting won't help." I asked for a copy of the will. Daniel said I had already heard it at the funeral gathering. That part stopped me, because a will had been read. I remembered sitting there after the burial, hearing legal language through a fog of grief. I remembered Daniel staring at the floor. I remembered Lauren sitting too still. I remembered the lawyer reading too fast. Now those details came back one by one. "I want another copy," I said. "You'll get one," Daniel answered. "But the deadline stays." "You're giving your father a deadline?" "I'm asking you not to make this harder." That was when grief turned into something colder. Not anger yet. Pressure. A push. I packed that night. Not because I believed him. Because my wife was dead, my son wanted me out, and I suddenly understood I might not be safe in my own home. I took clothes, Susan's photograph, a small box of papers, and the key rings from the kitchen drawer. I left almost everything else. Daniel watched from the doorway. Lauren stayed near him. Neither offered to help, neither offered to slow down. They stood there as if this were an awkward chore that had to be handled before dinner. I picked up one of Susan's sweaters and held it too long. Daniel saw me and said nothing. That silence stayed with me. Before I left, I looked at him and said, "Your mother would never do this to me." He answered too quickly. "You didn't know everything." That line lodged in me like a splinter. Maybe I was wrong, but it didn't feel right. I drove to a cheap motel outside the city and took a room that smelled like bleach and stale air. I set Susan's photograph beside the lamp and sat there for an hour without moving. I kept replaying the funeral. Daniel would not meet my eyes. Lauren looked cold, not heartbroken. And the will had been read too fast. I could still see the room, plates on a side table, people speaking in softened voices, coats draped over chairs. Me sitting there trying to stay upright while legal words moved past me faster than grief could follow. At the time, I blamed myself for not paying closer attention. Back in that motel room, I started wondering whether speed had been the point. One more thing bothered me. Harold Bennett never came to speak to me afterward. That was unlike him. He had handled our affairs for years. He knew us. If Susan had truly changed something that important, Harold would have spoken to me directly. The next morning I called Daniel. "Where's the copy of the will?" I asked. "I'm busy." "You were busy yesterday." "You'll get it." "Who read it?" "A law office." "Harold Bennett?" A pause. Then he said, "It was handled." That was not an answer. By noon I was driving to Harold Bennett's office. The building was the same. The glass door was the same, but the receptionist did not know me, and Harold Bennett was not there. The woman behind the desk told me, in a calm voice that almost made it worse, that Mr. Bennett had retired 6 months earlier. 6 months. I asked whether he had handled Susan's will recently. She checked and said no. No recent filing. No new matter. I walked back to my car with my heart pounding. Daniel had known Harold was retired. He never told me. And if Harold was gone, then who had handled the will Daniel used to push me out? I called Daniel from the parking lot. "You knew Harold retired." "Dad, I don't have time for this." "You knew. We used another firm. It was faster." "We?" "There were things Mom wanted done." "Then why hide it?" "I didn't hide anything. You just never asked." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was shameless. "You put me out of my house," I said. "And now you're telling me I should have asked better questions?" Lauren's voice came faintly through the phone. "Daniel, end this." He lowered his voice. "Stop making a scene." A scene. I was sitting alone in my car. Would you have trusted him after that? I went back to the motel and opened the box of papers I had brought. Insurance records, tax forms, envelopes, nothing useful. By evening, I was thinking through Susan's last months. Her heart condition had worsened. We knew that, but she had also become private in small ways. Not distant, careful. Once or twice she stopped talking when Daniel called. Once I saw her at the counter with a small key in her hand. She closed her fist around it when I walked in. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I did. Susan had rented a storage unit years earlier for old furniture, decorations, and family things. She usually handled it. I had not thought about it in a long time, but now I emptied my pockets onto the motel table, opened the bag I carried from the house, and found her spare keys. There it was, a narrow silver key I had not seen in years. The storage unit. I turned it over in my fingers and remembered Susan's face at the counter that day. The way she closed her hand too quickly. The way she said never mind when I asked about it. She had been carrying something alone even then. I had seen the edge of it and missed the shape. I sat there looking at that key until the motel room grew dark. Then I understood I had only one useful move left. At dawn the next morning, I drove straight there. The storage place sat on the edge of town behind a chain-link fence and a faded sign. I had not been there in years, but I recognized the rows of metal doors the moment I turned in. I signed in, gave Susan's unit number, and walked down the lane with that silver key in my hand. Some things feel heavier than they should. That key did. When I opened the unit, the first thing I saw was the past. Old chairs, holiday boxes, a lamp, Daniel's school things, a folded card table. For a second it all looked ordinary enough to make me doubt myself. Then I saw the safe. It sat on a plastic bin near the back wall. Newer than everything else. Dark metal. Clean edges. On top of it was an envelope with my name written in Susan's hand. Robert. I knew her handwriting before I touched the paper. I stood there with that envelope for longer than I want to admit. Then I opened it. Susan wrote that if I was reading the letter, something serious had happened. She said I needed to hear everything she had left before I trusted anyone. She gave me the safe combination, and she wrote one line that turned my blood cold. If things had unfolded the way she feared, then Daniel and Lauren had already shown me exactly who they were. That was not grief talking, that was warning. You tell me. Was I supposed to ignore that? I opened the safe. Inside was a digital recorder, an external hard drive, a USB drive, a notebook, and more envelopes labeled in Susan's hand. My wife had built a record. I took everything back to the motel, locked the door, shut the curtains, put the recorder on the table and pressed play. Her voice filled the room. Not the weak voice from her final days. Her steady voice. Clear. Controlled. In the first recording, Susan said she had overheard Daniel and Lauren talking. They did not want to wait years for the house. It was worth too much. Lauren spoke about speeding things up, and Daniel did not object. Susan said that was when she first believed they might be trying to change the will. I stopped the recording and played it again. Susan was never careless. If she believed something, she had reasons. The notebook was dated. Tight entries, conversations. Questions Lauren asked about Susan's medicine. Times Daniel pressed about property. Days when papers appeared and disappeared. Susan matched entries to recordings. The order of it all hit me hard. She had done this alone while I thought we were simply living through illness and grief. I heard myself ask the empty room, "Why didn't you tell me?" But I think I knew. She did not want to accuse our son without proof. And once proof began to appear, she may have believed the safest thing was to keep gathering it. The second recording was worse. Lauren was asking detailed questions about Susan's heart medication, what time she took it, whether she ever missed a dose, whether changing brands mattered. Susan answered carefully, but I could hear the caution underneath. Lauren did not sound concerned. She sounded interested. A few recordings later, Susan spoke into the recorder alone. She said she had started replacing her real medication with vitamins to test whether Lauren was tampering with the pills. Susan believed Lauren had already started interfering. She wanted proof. I had to stop the recorder and stand up. My wife had switched out life-saving medicine to test whether someone in our own family was trying to harm her. And as I listened further, I learned the price. Her heart condition worsened because she was no longer taking the real medication. She knew the risk. She took it because she feared what Daniel and Lauren might do if she left them unexposed. That still wasn't the worst part. The next recordings showed a pattern. Daniel pressing about future arrangements. Lauren asking who had access to documents. Daniel saying it would be easier if everything was settled now. Lauren saying, waiting forever is pointless. Each line by itself could be denied. Together they could not. By then I understood why Susan had put the safe in the storage unit instead of the house. She no longer trusted the house. Midway through the notebook I found Harold Bennett's name. Susan had met with him privately to put the real will back in place, the one that kept the house with me for life. Harold understood. Susan wrote that clearly. Then I saw something that took me a minute to understand. Susan had also allowed another law firm to prepare a different will, one that transferred the house to Daniel. I thought I had misread it. Then I listened to the matching recording. Susan explained that she believed Daniel and Lauren were looking for a will they could use, so she let the other firm create a version that would act as bait. If they used it after her death, they would expose themselves. Meanwhile, the real will remained secured. That was the trap. And Daniel walked into it the moment she died. I sat there staring at the wall. Susan had seen farther than I had. She knew our son had crossed a line long before I was willing to admit it. Late that night I heard the final set of recordings. Susan said there were 83 files in total. She said she had saved everything she could. The real will, Lauren's search history, and financial transactions tied to the outside law firm. She said if I was hearing her voice, I had to take all of it to the police, not to Daniel, not to anyone else. Then came her last message. She said she loved me. She said none of this was my fault. She said Daniel and Lauren had already chosen their path. Then she told me not to let them bury her twice. That line settled something in me. By morning I was no longer a grieving husband trying to explain away a family misunderstanding. I was a witness carrying evidence. I called Daniel once before I left the motel. I found some of Mom's things, I said. A pause. Then, what things? Papers, recordings, silence. Then Lauren's voice in the background. Ask him where. Daniel came back fast. Don't touch anything that belongs to the estate. Not belongs to Mom. Not are you all right. Belongs to the estate. I said you were in a hurry to get me out. You needed time somewhere else. That's what you call it? You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. There it was again. If I saw too much, I was confused. If I resisted, I was difficult. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in days, I told him. Then I hung up. I packed the recorder, the hard drive, the USB, the notebook, the envelopes, and Susan's letter into one bag. I kept the safe key in my pocket. By then, it felt like more than a key. It was the point where Susan's silence ended. At the police station, I asked to speak to someone about evidence connected to a death, a will, and an attempt to force me from my home. The desk officer listened, then called a detective. Her name was Emily Parker. She took me into a small room and asked me to start at the beginning. So I did. I told her about Susan's death, the funeral, Daniel's deadline, Harold Bennett's retirement, the storage unit, the letter, the safe, the recordings. Detective Parker took notes and listened. When I handed her the recorder and the notebook, her face changed in a small but important way. Do you believe your wife thought someone was harming her? She asked. I believe my wife knew it, I said. She nodded once. Mr. Hayes, she told me, I need to listen to all of this. I slid Susan's letter across the table. Then listen, I said. Because my son threw me out of my house 3 days after my wife was buried. For the first time since Susan died, the truth was no longer sitting in that motel room with me. I still wonder what you would have done. Detective Emily Parker did not offer comfort. She offered process. At that point, process was better. She took the recorder, the drives, the notebook, the envelopes, and Susan's letter. She asked about dates, about Susan's medication, about Daniel and Lauren's access to the house. about the funeral gathering, and about the outside law firm. Every answer seemed to lead to another question. That is how real trouble works. One lie cracks, and the rest begin to show. Before I left, Parker said, "Do not contact them again unless we ask you to. And if they contact you, tell us." I nodded. Then she added, "Do not go back into that house alone." That sentence stayed with me. When a detective tells a father not to return alone to the home where he raised his child, the world has shifted. I went back to the motel with nothing to do but wait. Waiting is hard when the question is whether strangers will help you. It is worse when the question is what your own family really did. That afternoon, Daniel called. "What did you do?" he asked. Not hello, not where are you, just that. "I went where I needed to go," I said. "You took things that belonged to Mom's estate. I took what your mother left for me. That's not for you to decide." "Did you know she kept records?" I asked. Silence. Then he said, "You're confused." That had become his answer to everything. "No," I said. "I was confused before. I'm less confused now." Lauren came onto the line. "Robert, whatever you found, you need to stop escalating this." Escalating. They liked words that turned their actions into my reactions. I said, "You asked my wife about her medication too often." The line went quiet. Then Lauren answered, slower now. "I was helping." "Were you?" "We cared for her." "Susan didn't think so," I said. That ended the call. "Maybe you see it differently. I didn't." The next days moved slowly. Parker called once and said they were reviewing the recordings and checking what they could confirm. She asked where Susan kept her medication and whether Lauren handled it directly. I told her only what I knew. By then, guessing felt dangerous. On the third day, Parker asked me to come back in. I remember the walk from the parking lot to the station doors. It was not long, but it felt longer than some years of my life. Hope can do that to a person. So can dread. I was carrying both. They had listened to enough recordings to see the pattern. More important, they had begun examining Lauren's laptop and online activity. One of the first hard confirmations was her search history. How to cause death with heart medication. How to alter a will after death. Parker pushed a summary across the table. I read each line slowly, trying to understand what kind of person searches for those things while sitting at your kitchen table and calling you family. "She wasn't just curious," I said. "No," Parker answered, "she was not. There were also financial transactions connected to the outside law firm Daniel had used. Susan had tracked that too. The money trail matched her notes. The false will had been positioned exactly where Daniel and Lauren could use it, and they used it the moment Susan died. That mattered almost as much as the searches, because cruel thoughts can be denied. Planned action leaves structure behind. By then, Parker had heard enough recordings to know Daniel was part of it. Not always in blunt language, not in some dramatic confession, but clearly enough. He knew about the rush. He knew about the property. He knew what Lauren was pressing for. And when Susan tested the interference by switching her medication for vitamins, the pressure around the medicine did not stop. I asked Parker, did he ever try to stop it? She looked at me for a second. "No," she said. "That was the cleanest wound in the whole thing. Not confusion. Not weakness. He did not stop it. A father can forgive a great many failures in a son. Bad temper, weak judgment, pride, laziness, even cowardice, if the man admits it and turns back. But standing beside wrong while your mother's health fails and your father is being lined up to lose his home is something else. That is not drift. That is choice." "Would you have stayed quiet after hearing that?" "I didn't." I gave a full statement, then another with more detail. The funeral, Daniel's demand that I leave, Harold Bennett being retired, the storage unit, the letter, the recordings. Susan had done her part. Now I had to do mine. Parker asked, "Do you think your wife hid this from you to protect you?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "I think she hid it until she had enough proof that even I couldn't explain it away." Parker nodded. "That sounds right." A week later, Daniel came to the motel. I opened the door and found him standing there with Lauren half a step behind him. The sight of them at that room turned my stomach. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "We need to talk," Daniel said. "No, we don't." Lauren spoke next. "Robert, the police contacted us. This has gone too far." I stepped into the doorway and pulled the door behind me. Daniel lowered his voice. "Whatever Mom left, you misunderstood it. Your mother was clearer than both of you," I said. He rubbed his face. "Dad, you're blowing up the family." There it was. The same rotten center. as if exposing betrayal is worse than committing it. You threw me out 3 days after your mother died, I said. Because the will said, the will you rushed to use. Lauren cut in. We were trying to handle things before they got messy. They got messy, I said, when you started counting the house before your mother was buried. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said quietly, you don't know what Mom wanted. I took the copy of Susan's letter from my pocket. I did not show it to him. I only held it. Your mother knew enough to leave instructions outside that house, I said. Think about that. He stared at the paper in my hand. Lauren stepped forward. If you cared about Daniel at all, you'd stop this. That sentence finished her for me. Even then, she was still trying to turn guilt into leverage. If Daniel had cared about me at all, I said, we would not be standing in a motel parking lot. Then I went inside and locked the door. After that, I stopped responding as a father first. I responded as a witness. The next morning, Parker called. Do not meet them again, she said. I won't. Good, we're close. Over the following days, the pieces locked into place. The outside law firm confirmed the bait will existed. Susan's real will, the one restored with Harold Bennett, was located and verified. The timing matched her notes. Susan had not imagined a scheme. She had documented one. The recordings mattered most. 83 total. 3 months of quiet accumulation. Not every file had a dramatic line. That was why they worked. Evil rarely announces itself. It leaks through repeated pressure, familiar voices, and ordinary words said for a dark purpose. At the end of the second week, Parker asked me to come in again. When I arrived, a stack of paperwork sat on the table. We are making arrests, she said. I did not feel triumph. I felt air return to my lungs. What charges? I asked. Conspiracy to commit murder, she said. Then forgery. Then inheritance fraud. Hearing those words attached to my son felt like hearing a stranger described with Daniel's face. Parker explained what would happen next, but I was hearing Susan's last message in my head. Do not let them bury me twice. They had not. I walked out to my car and sat there with both hands on the wheel. A father spends his life hoping the law never has to explain his child to him. That day it did. And from that point on, there was no path back to the lie they wanted me to live inside. I was not there when Daniel and Lauren were arrested. Detective Parker thought that was best, and I agreed. I did not need to see handcuffs to understand what they had done. Daniel was charged, Lauren was charged, and the house they tried to take became part of the case Susan had built in secret. The news moved through the family quickly. Some people called, some left messages. I ignored most of them. I had no patience left for anyone who wanted me to protect appearances, stay calm, or wait until all the facts came out. The facts were already out. That was the problem. Weeks passed before trial. During that time, I moved from the motel into a small temporary rental. Clean table, quiet rooms, enough space to think. Susan's photograph came with me. So did the copy of her letter, so did the safe key. I read the letter more than once. Not because I needed reminding, because I needed steadiness. The house in Columbus was no longer home by then. It was evidence. That hurt in its own separate way. A place can survive storms, repairs, and time. It does not always survive knowledge. The prosecution prepared carefully. Parker stayed in contact when needed. Nothing about the case felt rushed now. That mattered to me. The recordings would be central. The real will had been verified. The false will would be challenged directly. Lauren's search history, the financial link to the outside law firm, and Susan's notes would support the case. My testimony would cover the funeral, the deadline, Harold Bennett's retirement, the storage unit, and Daniel's behavior. In other words, I had to stand in court and tell the truth while my son sat close enough to hear every word. Before trial, I saw Daniel for the first time since the motel. He looked older already, not wiser, just worn down. He did not speak to me. Lauren sat beside him, pale and rigid but still hard in the face. I remember thinking, even now neither of them looks sorry. Not frightened in the way innocent people are frightened. Not broken in the way grieving people are broken. Just cornered. That difference mattered to me. That kept me steady. I was there to answer plainly. Nothing more and nothing less. The prosecutor met with me and went over the order. Clear answers. No guessing. No speeches. That suited me. When I took the stand, the courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Daniel looked at the table. Lauren watched me. I gave my name, my age. I said Susan Hayes was my wife. I said Daniel Hayes was my son. Then I described the house. 37 years in Columbus, Ohio. The life Susan and I built there. The will we made with Harold Bennett. The simple fact that the house was meant to remain mine for life. The prosecutor asked, "What happened 3 days after your wife died?" I answered, "My son told me to leave my house within 48 hours. The room went very still. He asked me to repeat Daniel's words as best I could. I did. Then he asked why I left. I told the truth. Because my wife had just died. Because I was in shock. Because something was wrong. Later he asked about the funeral gathering. Daniel would not look at me. I said. Lauren was cold, and the will was read too fast. Why did that matter? Because it did not fit what my wife and I had already put in place. Then came Harold Bennett. When did you learn he had retired? When I went to his office after Daniel forced me out. Did your son tell you beforehand? No. Did Mr. Bennett handle your wife's final will through that office? No. That mattered to the jury. I could see it. Then the prosecutor moved to the storage unit. The key, the safe, the letter, the recorder, the notebook. Each item was identified. A key is just metal until it opens the room where the truth was hidden. A letter is just paper until a dead woman uses it to speak over the lies of the living. When the prosecutor asked what Susan's letter said in substance, I told the jury that my wife warned me something serious had happened and instructed me to trust the evidence she left. Then the recordings were played. Not all 83 in full, but enough. Lauren asking about medication, Daniel pressing about settling things sooner, Susan documenting her fear, Susan explaining the real will, Susan explaining the bait will, Susan explaining why she no longer trusted them. A courtroom changes when recorded truth fills it. People stop moving, pens stop. There is no easy way to argue with a dead woman's voice when she has dates, documents, and 83 files behind her. At one point, Susan's final message was played. I did not look at Daniel while it played. I looked straight ahead. Afterward, the prosecutor asked, "Did you understand from your wife's message that she believed the defendants were involved in a plan against both of you?" "Yes." "And what did you do after hearing it?" "I took everything to the police." The defense tried confusion, grief, and misinterpretation. They implied illness had made Susan fearful. They suggested conversations were taken out of context. One attorney asked, "Mr. Hayes, your wife never directly accused your son to you while she was alive, correct?" "That's true," I said. "So your conclusions were formed after her death." "My conclusions were formed after I heard 83 recordings, found her notes, saw the real will, learned about the false one, and listened to my son force me out of my home." He moved on. Another asked, "Could your wife have misunderstood concern about her medication as interference?" "A concerned person does not search how to cause death with heart medication," I said. That line ended quickly too. The trial lasted long enough to wear everyone down. The real will was confirmed as valid. The false will was shown to be the one Daniel and Lauren used against me. Lauren's search history came in. The financial transactions came in. Detective Parker testified. And the recordings kept doing their work. The hardest part was not hearing Lauren's voice. It was hearing Daniel's. He did not sound angry. He sounded practical. That was worse. Anger can be excused as heat. Calm planning cannot. He had time to think. He kept going. When the jury went out, I sat with my hands folded and looked at the courtroom clock. I did not predict anything. Too much had already gone wrong after I once believed I knew my own family. When the jury returned, the foreperson stood. Guilty. On conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty. On forgery. Guilty. On inheritance fraud. Each word landed separately. Daniel closed his eyes after the first verdict. Lauren stared ahead. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. Susan had not imagined it. She had paid for the truth with her failing health, and now the truth stood in open court where no one could push it back into silence. At sentencing, Daniel received 15 years. Lauren received 20. The false will was thrown out. The real will was recognized. Legal ownership of the house returned to me. Was I overreacting? Not after all that. Not after 83 recordings, a hidden safe, a forged path through another law firm, and a son who tried to put his father out before the week of his mother's funeral was over. When I walked out of the courthouse, the noise stayed behind me. Ahead of me, for the first time in months, there was quiet. Was I supposed to stay silent after all that? I wasn't. Once the case was over, people expected me to move back into the house, Legally, it was mine again. The false will was gone. The real one had been recognized. Daniel and Lauren were in prison. In the ordinary sense, the threat was over, but a house can be returned on paper and still be lost in every way that matters. That was difficult for some people to understand. They thought justice should restore feeling as neatly as it restores title. It does not. Paper can settle ownership. It cannot cleanse a room. I went back one last time alone after everything was final. The locks had been dealt with. There was no practical danger left there. Still, when I stood in the doorway, every room felt different. Susan was there in every part of it. So was the betrayal. The hallway where Daniel told me to leave. The kitchen where Susan once stood with that hidden key. The bedroom where her slippers used to sit. The living room where we spent decades growing older together. A place can hold love and damage at the same time. This one did. I walked through slowly. In the closet, I found one of Susan's scarves behind a box. In the kitchen drawer, I found the kind of rubber bands she always saved. Small things. Ordinary things. Those are often what hurt most. I sat in the living room with the copy of Susan's letter in my hand. That letter found me in the safe. It steadied me in the motel. It stayed in my pocket in court. And sitting there in that house, it became something else. Permission. Permission not to keep a shell just because it once held a life. That was when I decided to sell it. Some people did not understand. One man I had known for years told me he would keep it out of principle. But principle was never the issue. Peace was. The house had done its duty. It sheltered a marriage, raised a child, and held decades of memory. Then it became the center of a lie and the target of a plan. I did not want the rest of my life organized around walls that now carried both Susan's love and Daniel's greed. So I sold the house. I did not rush it. I did not do it in anger. I walked through each step with a clear head because Susan deserved that much. The house was no longer being stolen from me. It was being turned into something useful. The process was simple. Paperwork, closing, signatures, numbers, the kind of plain business that once would have felt impossible when I was sitting in that motel with Susan's recorder on the table. When the sale was finished, I had choices. I could keep the money, move somewhere larger, and let the whole thing become a private tragedy. Instead, I kept thinking about one line from Susan's last message. The truth would matter, even if it arrived late. Late truth is still useful. After the trial, I began hearing from people in quiet ways. An older man whose daughter kept pressuring him about a deed. A widow whose nephew had become too interested in her finances. A woman who said her own children treated her independence like an inconvenience. Different details. Same pattern. Family using age as an opening. That was when the idea took shape. I used the money from the sale of the house to establish the Susan Hayes Foundation. Its purpose was simple. Help older people who were being deceived, manipulated, or pushed aside by their own families in matters tied to property and inheritance. Not because every family conflict is criminal, but because I now knew how quickly an older person can be isolated once relatives start calling pressure help and theft planning. The foundation gave Susan's sacrifice a direction beyond the courtroom. That mattered to me. It still does. A verdict punishes. A foundation continues. I moved into a small apartment in Ohio. Small by choice. Clean. Quiet. No wasted rooms. No ghosts in the hallway. Susan's photograph sits where morning light reaches it. The safe key is in my desk drawer now. I kept it because it marks the day confusion ended. I work with the foundation steadily. Some days it is paperwork. Some days it is calls. Some days it is simply listening to people who know something is wrong but have been told that speaking up would tear the family apart. I know that language now. I know what hides inside it. Silence rarely protects the person being harmed. Most of the time, it protects the person applying the pressure. People sometimes ask about Daniel. They want to know if I speak to him, if prison changed him, if I forgave him. I tell them the same thing every time. I do not live inside those questions anymore. Forgiveness is not the same as access. Grief is not the same as permission. And being a father does not require a man to offer himself up for harm a second time. That is the lesson I learned too late and still in time. Susan saw the danger first. She did not scream. She gathered facts. She left a trail no honest person could miss. She protected me in the only way left to her. Then, after she was gone, I protected what remained by refusing to look away. I did not win by force. I won by believing the evidence my wife died preserving. Sometimes, late in the evening, I think about the life we were supposed to have. Susan and I growing old in that Columbus house. Quiet mornings, familiar rooms, smaller problems. The ordinary future older couples expect after decades together. That life ended before it should have. I cannot change that, but I can decide what follows it. The foundation bears Susan's name because she paid the greater cost. I only carried forward what she left. When I help someone hold on to a deed, question a suspicious paper, or understand that pressure from family is still pressure, I am not building something new from nothing. I am extending the truth she preserved. That is what remains. Not the house. Not the false will. Not the voices that told me I was overreacting. What remains is her clarity, my boundary, and the fact that the law finally saw what she had known alone. At 72, my life is quieter than it once was. Smaller too, but smaller is not lesser. There is peace in a room where no one is measuring your worth against property. There is dignity in waking up without fear of who is smiling at you for the wrong reason. There is relief in knowing that a closed door is sometimes health, not bitterness. The apartment is enough. It asks nothing from me except honesty and upkeep. The work is enough. The truth is enough. I still carry Susan with me. In decisions, in caution, in standards, in the refusal to let politeness cover corruption. She is present every time I choose plain truth over family theater. I loved my son. That did not save him from what he chose. I loved my wife. That is why I listened when her voice came back to me through a recorder in a motel room and told me the worst thing I ever had to know. Some nights I take out the copied letter and read only the first line, not because I need all of it anymore, just enough to remember that she trusted me to finish what she started. I did. And when I lock my apartment door at night, there is no argument behind it, no pressure in the hallway, no one waiting for me to surrender what is mine for the sake of keeping peace. There is only quiet. At my age, I have learned to respect quiet when it is honest. That is where I live now, in Ohio, in a small apartment, still standing, still clear, with Susan's name on a foundation built from the house they tried to steal. Heavy, necessary, finished.